Hi, everyone, and welcome. Verified First is excited to be joined by Connie Stopher, Executive Director at Economic Development Coalition, to discuss Reinventing the Volunteer Experience. Face to Face is a brand new webinar series here where nonprofit, church, and volunteer management leaders will explore current topics in the nonprofit community with some of America's most notable nonprofit leaders. Our goal with this series is to bring relevant and timely topics to our nonprofit community that supports you in your roles. If these conversations are important to you, be sure to check out our face-to-face calendar on our website at verifiedfirst.com to keep up to date on topics we're talking about. Now, before we dive into today's discussion, I'd like to talk about some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, so you can watch it as a resource, pass it along to your coworkers, or watch it whenever you want. We'd love for you to utilize that chat function during this event to send in any questions that you have for our speakers. To prepare, let's practice now. In the chat feature, let us know where you're tuning in from and what the weather is like for you today. Verified First is located in Meridian, Idaho, and it's currently a sunny 46 degrees. Great, thanks everyone. With that in mind, I'd like to start by thanking Volgistics for sponsoring this episode of Face to Face and officially welcoming everyone to today's discussion. Please send a friendly hello and a warm welcome in the chat to our face-to-face host, Dr. Ben Cornett, Verified First Director of Marketing, and Connie Stopher, Executive Director at Economic Development Coalition. Without further ado, take it away, Ben.
Thank you. And I got a shout out to our voice. Sometimes we call it voice in the wind. Her name is Amanda. She does excellent. And Connie, good to see you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm really excited for today's chat here, Connie, as we talk about reinventing the volunteer experience. And I'm really excited for our audience. You know, there's a lot of you in the room today, so hopefully we bring a tremendous amount of value as we bring kind of some of the topics about volunteer experience in this face-to-face for nonprofits education at church series. I'm really excited also and thankful for Volgistics for being a sponsor of our event. They've been a long-standing partner of Verified First, and many of you in our audience, I've seen you before. So welcome back and welcome to our first ever episode of Face-to-Face for Nonprofits. And you know, as we get going today, Connie, maybe take a moment and introduce yourself a little bit. I think you can say it better than I can, but you know, really excited for you and all your experience, not only in your current role, but in previous roles and boards that you've been on in the nonprofit world.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. So like you mentioned, I'm currently the Executive Director of the Economic Development Coalition of Southern California. We're located in Temecula in Southwest Riverside County. I just came into this role at the beginning of December, so fairly new here. But previous to that, I served as the Executive Director of Southern Idaho Economic Development Organization. We covered an 8-county region in Southern Idaho. Prior to that, I served on the South Coast Development Council on the south coast of Oregon and covered about half of the Oregon coast there, so another big region and lots of different unique communities there. I have a master's degree in public administration focusing on nonprofit management leadership and local government. I also have a nonprofit leadership certificate from the Harvard Kennedy School of Executive Education. And in just my own roles and being involved in the community, I've sat on a number of boards for different organizations, from community organizations, chambers, taxing districts, like the whole works of different types of board service and all of that. So just different experience there. But I'm excited to be here and to hear questions from the attendees and to chat with you about volunteerism.
Yeah, good. I'm really excited because this is an opportunity really for us to kind of ask some questions that we've seen from our HR coffee hours that we've done in the past over the past 2 years. You know, questions we see from nonprofit organizations on our Facebook page. You know, so really today is an opportunity for those people to ask questions they've always been wanting to ask. We might not have the answers, but we're watching the chat. We have people from all over the country here, Connie. You know, from Oregon to Rapid City, South Dakota, Ohio, you know, Alberta, even in Canada. Wow, we got some friends up there. Dallas, Texas, somewhere it's rainy and dreary, but they didn't say the name of the city, Colorado. So really, for those of you joining today, we really encourage to use the chat feature, ask the questions you have. We have some ideas. And I just want to talk a little bit about my role. I've been with Verified First about 3.5 years now, and I head up our marketing team here at Verified First. Over this last period, we've created, we're a background screening company, and we're not going to talk about our product really, but we've created opportunities where we've been able to help leaders in the HR and talent acquisition world come together, and also in the nonprofit world, because COVID's been a challenge for everyone. We've been able to innovate and come up with ways for people to get together and trade ideas. So that's what today's all about, is trading ideas. And I kind of want to just dig into some of the questions. So, when we think about the current environment of volunteering here, Connie, COVID changed the landscape. It's pretty apparent. The United Nations reported a spike in interest of volunteering after the initial quarantine back in 2020. But a lot of volunteers were turned away because of COVID protocols. People couldn't get together, or organizations couldn't figure out how to help people volunteer. How would you describe the impact of COVID, the effects of COVID, if you will, on volunteerism today, now that we're in 2022? And some people say the pandemic is now an endemic and it's past us.
Yeah, so I think if we look back on that early COVID time, I think we did see a lot of people trying to do just things to make people feel better, right? Like we all wanted to do something like putting rainbows in our windows, or sending care packages for healthcare workers, or just doing something because everyone wanted to do something. They felt a little bit helpless, like they couldn't find an end to COVID, but they wanted to help people get through it. And I think that's inherent in a lot of us, and I'm sure just about everybody on this call has that inherent want to help. And I just saw a recent stat that this past year, there was a 25% increase in giving and volunteerism from pre-pandemic levels. And I think because of just the environment that we're in, it's not just COVID, right? There's COVID, and then there's the war in Ukraine, and there's all sorts of other things happening in the world where people just feel like they need to do something, right? They want to do what they can. They're going to send strollers to Ukraine for parents who need them, just all those things. People want to do something. And so I think that's partly our job as nonprofit leaders, is to tap into people's altruistic want to help. And so I think that's why it's really important to, when you're thinking about volunteer opportunities, is to give them really meaningful work, because then it satisfies that need and it feeds and grows on that, right? You get that emotional high from knowing that you've helped somebody. So whether, you don't want them just like stuffing envelopes or like sweeping up or whatever, they need to be connected to that good, because there's something driving that desire for them to speak out, to either give monetarily or to give up their time. And I think we're just in such a chaotic time that people need that emotional good feeling, because the news in the world is so depressing at times, that we need to be the good people in the world. Like Mr. Rogers said, to look for the good people. We can be those good people out there doing good things and helping. And so I think this is a trajectory that if we can all capture it, can keep that momentum of people feeling engaged.
Yeah. That's a good call out, and there is a lot of chaos in the world. I mean, my family is small. We've got the three of us here, in my home. Right next door, seriously, less than 100 feet that way, I've got a family that's from Ukraine. And I got to recognize there's probably people on the call here today that are either from Ukraine, or they got family or loved ones in Ukraine. It's a tough situation. They've got 2 kids, beautiful girls. They play with my daughter all the time, but they can't talk to their family in Ukraine. There's no communication. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what the situation. They don't even know if the family's in Ukraine still. So definitely it puts a lot of stress. But those are the kind of people. He's out helping our neighbor. We have an 82-year-old neighbor across the street the other way, and he's out helping and serving others, just because I think, to your point, gives them that, I think you called it emotional high. I like that. But yeah, so it's definitely an impact on what's going on in the world, and obviously connected to COVID. Are there any trends that you've witnessed or experienced maybe in this last, 2 years, year and a half, as we've gone through this, that you're seeing some of the organizations, nonprofit organization, your sphere of your world, are doing things different?
Well, I think definitely, just like for-profit businesses had to pivot during the pandemic nonprofits had to as well. So if you couldn't get volunteers in face to face to do the volunteering that you needed, how can they still be engaged? How can you still keep that connection with those people that were traditionally supporters of your organization? And sometimes that's giving them something concrete that they're giving towards. And I know lots of nonprofits do this. You know, they say like $5 a month can buy meals for this many families, or, you know, whatever it is, giving them something concrete. And I think the real challenge for nonprofits is to keep consistency for volunteerism through the good times, right? It's the bad times when people are like, how can I help? But when things are good, people are like, oh, they probably don't need me. I don't need to be giving quite as much, or I don't need my time because things are all really great. But there are always people that need help, and your organization needs to sustain funding and activity and relevance. And so how do you keep them engaged when there's not a crisis, you know, when there's not, because someday we will be over this pandemic. Someday, hopefully, Russia will leave Ukraine and we'll have some calm times. But how do you keep people engaged? And so I think that's connecting them to your mission, connecting them to the good things that you're doing every other day, all the other people that you're serving. And that's a lot of work. That's the communication and messaging and keeping people really connected to your organization, and not just giving $10 when there's a tsunami or when there's some other crisis that will eventually happen. But
yeah, that's good. I think there's a lot of futuristic things that more and more organizations that I'm seeing are thinking about, you know, is connecting not only the people that want to volunteer with the donors. Sometimes they want to have that experience of both donating, volunteering, and be involved. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other challenges. Connie, you already mentioned one. Obviously, the war in Ukraine is a challenge facing nonprofit and the volunteer community. But before we go down that road, you know, we got a couple questions in chat already. So I like to address those questions, and you know, it's okay if we say we don't know. It's a good question. I'll get back to you. But Kathleen, thank you for your question. So Kathleen's question, and you know, maybe we have an answer. I don't know, you know, what kind of experience you have in the healthcare world, but maybe someone else in the audience has an answer too. So her question is, she works at a hospital and healthcare is struggling to keep staff, and they're asking for volunteers to help more and more because they're short staffed. Now, I don't know here in Idaho, but California probably, but at least here in Idaho, everything's short staffed. And so some of the volunteers are having this idea, I don't want to take the people's jobs away. Any advice or comment? Have you seen that or experienced that, or, you know, have friends in the nonprofit space or ideas of how to handle that fear of taking jobs away? Because I don't think I think there's more jobs than we have people.
Yeah, there's 100% that is a problem. And in economic development, that's a message I've been trying to get out to employers, because I think people thought when the pandemic happened, everybody went home and that they were going to eventually come back to work. And most people, if they're going to go back to work, they're back to work. And to not expect another wave of people coming back to work all of a sudden. And so staffing is what it's going to be forever right now. Like, and that's a hard thing for hospitals who need a certain amount of staff on hand to take care of patients. Hospitals are in a particularly tough spot, I think, for getting volunteers during a pandemic, because it's a dangerous environment that healthcare workers are in right now. And so, you know, I've volunteered in hospitals before, like when I was in high school doing like candy striper work and stuff like that, and that was great. But I would be very hesitant now during a pandemic to put myself, and thank goodness healthcare workers and all the support staff are there for us right now. But that's a unique challenge for healthcare right now to bring in volunteers, but you need them. And so I think connecting people with what you need, right? So as far as like taking someone's job, it's not someone's job if someone's not applying for it and you can't fill it, right? And you've tried, but I think just connecting people with who that person's going to be serving. So if you need volunteers to run meals, right, to rooms, you know, something that doesn't require any special medical training, you just need someone to run meals, or to bring in comfort items for children who are in the hospital, or to rock babies in the NICU, or like whatever it is. There's plenty of volunteer opportunities in hospitals that I know, like you could find a whole army of grandparents out there who would love to go rock babies in NICUs, right? Like, so I think finding those things that people can do that really pulls on their heartstrings, you know, going whatever it is that you need to do that isn't a traditional job. So you're not finding volunteers to be rad techs or to be administering medicine, but finding those little niches in the hospital where people are going to really feel that emotional high. They're not going to necessarily be putting their family at risk right now during the pandemic. That's really, I think, one of the challenges I think that hospitals are probably facing for volunteers right now.
Yeah, that's true. And Kathleen, hopefully that helps on your question a little bit. I think to summarize that a little bit, what I got, Connie, is they're not displacing employees if people aren't applying. And if there's a shortage of staff, they need help. So maybe that helps get that message out a little bit. And I really like the idea of building the army that you called it, Connie, the army of grandparents. And
Yeah.
I've got parents that are retired, and we've got an 20-month-old baby, and they love to be the grandparent. They love to sit there and rock and whatever they can do. But good question. Let's ask one more question from the audience, and we'll move on to our conversation a little bit. This one's from Bill. So Bill, thank you for your question. And this is kind of, you talked about this emotional high. So you've coined a new term. I think, Connie, good job. So Bill's question is, what are some ideas maybe to make a not so great job? You talked about sweeping maybe. What are some ideas to make the not so great volunteer need become more meaningful? The jobs have to get done. How do you make them more meaningful so the person can get that emotional high that you mentioned? Any ideas?
Yeah. So I think part of it, so one example, there's a nonprofit that's based in Twin Falls, Idaho called Sleep in Heavenly Peace. They make beds for kids who don't have beds. So their mission is to make sure that no kid sleeps on the floor. And so they make beds. And some of the jobs aren't super glamorous. Like you're just like sanding the ends of boards, right? And like probably lots of sweeping up sawdust and things like that. And they get people in there as families to do that, because some of that is things that kids could do that can help. And kids love to sweep. Kids love to clean up. Kids love to be helping their parents. And so if you have kind of a non-glamorous job, I bet you kids would love to do it. And tapping into groups like Boy Scout troops, Girl Scout troops, youth organizations, things like that, where they can come in and do some of those things that don't require power tools, they don't require any additional training, but it gets them introduced to that volunteering and what they're doing, right? Like helping other kids have beds to sleep on, or whatever it is the task is. You don't want, someone who's got, who's a professional is probably going to get bored with the sweeping, or whatever that job is after a while. But I think if you're always connecting it to why you need it done, and how it's helping achieve the mission, but also having them have some other things to do. I think any volunteer after a while sweeping floors is going to get bored with it and want more. And so making sure that you're keeping them engaged with the end product of what you're creating as an organization.
Yeah, good. Well, let's, obviously we mentioned a lot of different things impacting the volunteer or the current environment. You got the war, you've got COVID. There's a lot of comments in the chat here as well about, you got to be careful too, because you can't ask volunteers to do the same jobs that paid employees would do. That's not quite legit either. So there's this really tough balance if you're a volunteer manager, right? Or you're, an executive director of a nonprofit. It's not easy. So that's why, I've enjoyed my last 2 years talking with all these nonprofit organizations, because they're doing amazing things with very little resources a lot of times, and sometimes, a big fault. But as we think about addressing those challenges, any last thoughts, about dealing with the current environment and the lack of staff, the lack of volunteers? Are there any ideas where people might tap into additional resources they haven't thought about, or different avenues, either probably mostly to recruit volunteers to do those volunteer roles? Any last thoughts, Connie, before we move on?
Yeah, one thing that's really worked well for my organizations is, particularly if you have like an event that's coming up or like a one-off sort of thing that you need a bunch of hands for, is to reaching out to your businesses in town, like your banks and credit unions, or bigger companies that have staff that are really involved in the community. Usually they have a certain number of hours or time that they have their employees out volunteering in the community. And there's been times where I've reached out and I said, hey, we have this event coming up, and they'll say like, yeah, we'll send 25 people over that day. Where do you need them? What do you need them to do? And so those are great ways if you just need a whole bunch of hands to do something on a particular day. And we've done that for like beautification projects. We've done that for building playgrounds. We've done that for all sorts of things where you can get a bunch of people all together and then do a bunch of press, have the news come out and cover it, so that next year you've got businesses calling you to be like, hey, we'd love to help. And that's how we really grew it over the years, is that we made sure we had press there, which is great for the companies that are volunteering. They love that. It's great for you because it's easier for you to find people next year if people are asking you how they can volunteer. So don't overlook your companies and your businesses in town who maybe aren't going to give financially, to your event. Maybe they do too, but maybe they have a whole bunch of hands that they can lend you for a project. So
yeah, that's really good feedback. I think press is often overlooked. People are afraid to talk to the press sometimes, and the fear of the camera or whatever it might be. Good thoughts. As we transition here, so Tasha made a comment in the chat here, and it was specifically about including a social aspect. And it just kind of happens to drive with our conversation today. When we think about social aspect, or maybe the term social capital, we call it, it's a big aspect of volunteering, right? To your point, it's get the community involved, get the media involved, whatever you can do. Maybe talk to us a little bit about, in your mind, what is social capital and why is it important?
Well, it's really important because it's your credibility as an organization, right? So it's you're out there doing good works for other people, and other people want to do good works for you because of what you do, and so you're building that up. And one huge tool for building that social capital is your board. So when you're building your board and adding new people to your board, who are they? You want your board members to bring their talents, treasures, and time to your organization. And one of those treasures is likely going to be their social network. Who do they know? Who are they connected to? Who's going to know more about your organization because they're involved? And so making sure that you are utilizing them, and then when you bring them on, they know you're going to use them in that way, to help broaden the light that's shown on your organization and all that you do, and that they're meant to be out there being your spokesperson and your cheerleader and helping spread the word, and getting more people involved, getting more donors, getting more volunteers. That's part of a board member's job. I don't think people do utilize their boards well enough, and I know I've been guilty of this before when I've got a 42-person board and trying to manage all of those. People keeping them engaged, but boards are volunteers too, and so using their social capital that they bring to the organization to help build the organization's social capital is, I think, really critical and sometimes overlooked.
Yeah. And so social capital, if you had your Connie Stopher mini definition, what would you say it is? So someone that maybe is listening doesn't understand the idea of social capital. You have a brief definition how you would define that?
Social capital, in my Connie Stopher definition, would be your value, and it's the value that you bring to your realm, but it's also what you can, I guess, the favors you can call into, right? So if you've got an organization that's doing lots of good work, it's easier to make that phone call to the big company to say, hey, I'm XYZ organization. We do all of this amazing stuff for the community. I need you to be a part of that. And if you've got really good, strong social capital where people trust you, you've got credibility, and people know that you do good work and use your dollars well. That's the other part of that social capital, is that you're spending people's dollars well in the community. It's easier to make those phone calls. It's harder if no one knows who you are, if you've had some missteps in the past and people haven't always been, your organization hasn't always been transparent. Like, we've seen those organizations. That's an example of very little to no social capital. You've got good social capital when it's easy to make those phone calls. If it's hard, that's probably something that has to be worked on. So.
Yeah, good. It's really good input.
That was a long definition. That wasn't the Merriam-Webster version, but
it's all good. And we're real, so we're giving you our real thoughts here, and we're real people. It's good. It kind of ties in a little bit. We have another question from Allie. So again, for our audience, thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. I love the questions because they make our chat more fun, more on the cuff and less scripted, right? So Allie specifically is in the law enforcement environment, and obviously with the pandemic, they've lost a ton of volunteers. How does social capital impact your ability to gain, well, let's say, I think recruit is the right word, recruit and retain volunteers? We're now on this kind of endemic mode, volunteers have gone. How does social capital, what are ways you use social capital maybe to recruit and gain volunteers?
Well, that's a great question. And it's the same thing. So I said in my definition that it's being able to make that call to that big company to say, I need your financial support, or I need you to send me volunteers. That's the same thing with getting somebody's time, right? If we think all about us individually, how busy we are in our own lives, doing our jobs, taking care of our families, little bit of time for hobbies and self-care, and then we've got maybe a little bit of time that we can dedicate to something that we're passionate about. And if you're going to get people's very limited discretionary time and maybe very limited discretionary funds for them to give you, you need to have credibility. You need to be trustworthy. They need to know that you're going to take that $5 that they are giving you and turn it into $50, right? And you need to have a track record. So part of that, and it's hard, I think, for people who are in nonprofits, because I think we tend to be, when we want to take care of other people, we're not the people who are like, look at all the amazing things I'm doing. But you have to be your biggest cheerleader, right? You need to show those dollars. You need to say what you're doing with them, and you need to show and celebrate the good works that you're doing. So that means talking to the press and the media. That means showing those numbers. It means being savvy at social media, because that's how people are probably going to discover you if they don't know about you already. And it's really tooting your own horn about the good works that you're doing. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to capture them. But they need to really believe in you for them to give you, because they're making an investment in your organization from their own personal time. And that's, I think, for most people, their most valuable commodity is their time.
Yeah, I wrote an article recently on the attention economy, right? And it's really about, how do you gain just a moment of attention? And if you can get that attention, that moment is a way that connects to value, right? And what you're doing. So good thoughts, Connie. I think, hopefully, Allie, this helps a little bit. I know law enforcement is kind of a tough one to get the right kind of volunteers sometimes, but hopefully it gives you some ideas. When you have a thriving social capital, and I'm thinking economic development. I know I've seen you guys in every city I've lived in. You guys do a lot of good for building local community and, bringing business to smaller towns. At least that's been my experience. What are, when you have this thriving social capital, this recognition that you're doing a lot of good, whether it's economic development or it's, Red Cross or, someone like that, they're doing a lot of good. How do you foster that? How do you don't keep the flame going, if you will?
It's hard, right? You got to raise the bar every single time and do something bigger. And economic development is challenging because a big part of what we do, we can't talk about, right? So if we're recruiting companies, we have to keep all of that confidential until the company's ready to announce. And there's years of work that go into recruiting companies. So there's a big portion of what we do that we can't tell anybody anything about, other than we're working really hard and we promise we're doing good things. And so it's all the rest of the things that we do. And it's not uncommon for people to not know what economic development is. I've had so many times I've said that's what I do, and people are like, so what exactly is that? And it's different in every community. It looks a little bit different, but it's important, one, for us to make sure that we tell our story when we can. So when we've got a big announcement, for a company, to make sure that we take some of that credit. A lot of that credit goes to the company or to the particular city, but we have to make sure that we get our name in there too. Don't be shy for making sure that your logo's on the banner, or that you're in that picture at the groundbreaking, or that you're cutting that ribbon. Make sure that you get the dues for the work that you gave, but also giving back in other ways too. So we do lots of events where we're doing free trainings for communities, and that might be helping build capacity in small communities, making sure that cities know the work that you're doing for them the rest of the year and not just on groundbreaking days. It can be challenging, because that's another full-time job of making sure that you're constantly communicating, giving updates on what's going on, the value that you're bringing. And we do an annual ROI report. So for every dollar that was invested in our organization, how many new dollars in capital investment and how many new dollars in payroll were created in our communities, so that they know the value that they're getting. They don't have to guess about that. So you're making sure you're communicating that.
And that definitely bumps up the value. I think Melissa in the chat, she says it pretty concisely. I think it's a really interesting comment, Melissa, so I'm gonna steal from you. Maybe we invite Melissa to be interviewed down the road, but she said that, when you're talking about the work you're doing, don't look at it as bragging what you're doing, look at what we did. And her comment is, quote, look at the needs you're helping to meet. And I think when we think about we're meeting needs, then it becomes a different conversation. You build on that social capital you have. So well said, Melissa. Thanks for the comment. It's a good one, huh?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, so, obviously we've talked a little bit about kind of current environment, a little bit about social capital. We're about halfway mark in our chat today. I want to want to get our audience engaged in a quick poll. So we're gonna kind of pause things a little bit. When it comes to managing volunteers, creating social capital, improving volunteer experience, technology typically is involved. And this is a start of kind of an ongoing report we're going to be working with Logistics and some of our other partners on here at Verified First. So I'm going to launch this poll on your screen. It's a quick question. I'm going to ask our audience to participate, but the question is, as it pops up here, probably take a minute or two, my little wheel is going, but the question is, what areas of your volunteer management systems do you need help with within the next 60 days? So take a moment, we'll give time for everyone to vote here and participate in kind of the areas you need help with. Connie, you've seen these volunteer recruitment, volunteer retention, logistics. We put them on there as a sponsor, obviously, volunteer background screening, e-giving, fundraising. If you were to take a gut stab at our 100%, what's the number one on the list?
Ooh, I think it would be logistics maybe, or fundraising. So I'm hedging my bets, but.
Okay, good. Yeah, and this is a new poll for us, so I can't tell you any historical. We'll close the poll here in just a few moments, and when everyone's different, and you can pick more than one. You can pick any that apply. So we'll give everyone just a few more seconds here. I kind of, in participating in the HR coffee hours for the last 2 years, and we heard a little bit today, volunteer recruitment and volunteer retention are hot topics. So, I kind of think of that as like probably going to hit the top of our list here, but let's go ahead and close the poll. We'll see what kind of result we got and see if we get any, surprises. There we go. It's coming.
Oh, wow. You were right. I was off.
Yeah. What was number one?
Logistics.
It hasn't come up on my screen yet.
It's a number one, recruitment.
Okay. Volunteer recruitment. Not surprising, right?
Yeah.
Especially with some of the questions that people are, they've lost volunteers. They're trying to get people back in the volunteer role, making sure people feel safe, engaging people. And let's go ahead and hide the results here. With this, I want to go to a question that came from Krista. And Krista, thank you for your question. This is a good question. Well, I think it's a good question. The question is, any tips on helping older volunteers move on? Maybe these are people that are no longer physically able to perform tasks that are needed. That's a really interesting question and a hard one. How do you engage them in a different way, maybe? Or, I feel for that because, I just had I'm still young, but I had my 48th birthday yesterday. My folks are getting old, and there's some things I want my folks to move on. So any ideas, Connie, of how to help older volunteers move on with grace, and they can't physically participate?
So I feel like there's two sides to that coin. One, and I've had this problem on boards before, where I've had somebody serving on a board for 30 years, and they are a wealth of knowledge, but it's time to get some fresh blood, some fresh perspectives, some diversity on your board. And it is hard to kindly be like, maybe you should think of somebody to replace you. But I think that's something that you can build into your organizations about mentorship. So giving them an opportunity to mentor new volunteers in the roles that they do, so that they're trained up and can do that role for you. So having them kind of mentor a younger, newer volunteer is an idea. But on the other side of that coin, I'm thinking about our older populations, and sometimes our older populations, this volunteer opportunity is their only social outing, right? It's their only connection with social groups. So if there's a way that you can keep them engaged in some way, it's so valuable for their quality of life, for the fulfillment they get out of every day, that I would encourage you to find some way for them, whether that's helping them bring more recruits in or finding some other task for them to do, so that they still stay active. When I was in Coos Bay, Oregon, our offices were in the visitor center, and they utilized volunteers for the visitor center front desk. And there was a gentleman in there that was 92, super spry. His name was Bob. He went skydiving for his 90th birthday. Like, wow. He was. I wish I was as active as he was at his age. So I think there's things that they can do, right? And I think it's hard if you're spending more time helping them than they are helping you, and they're at that stage. But if there's something that they can do, or maybe you have a partner organization that has a need that they are better suited for, that might be a really great opportunity to not say like, see you, Bob, I never, you're too old to help around here. Everyone has value that they can bring.
Yeah.
And so. Yeah.
That's good. I like that you bring the skydiver Bob to the story. That's super real.
Yeah,
I
he
love
did the
that.
sailboat. Bob is awesome. I want to be Bob when I grow up. So.
Yeah, me too. I mean, 92 and skydiving. Yeah, I don't know about skydiving, but 92 and being able to and willing to do stuff like that. Yeah, sign me up. Krista, hopefully that helps with some ideas. What I heard from Connie, kind of just a summary is, find other organizations that are maybe partner organization of yours that could use someone like, an older volunteer. And then the second thing I think I took away from that is looking at using them as mentors and bringing in younger talent to, not to position as a replacement, but position it to, help them teach others to do what they do, and I know that's not easy. That's easy said, not easy done. So good question.
We always love to be asked for our own, like, so if you went up to them and said like, Bob, you have been doing this job for a long time. We've got somebody new coming in. Could you help them? People love to be needed and to feel that need. So even if it's, I think that would still give them a lot of value, even if they're doing it in a little bit different way.
So I want to kind of ping the next question. This one's from Sharon. So Sharon, thanks for your question. Into kind of, creating and updating recruitment methods. It's kind of interesting. We didn't know that the response to the question was going to be recruitment. And then all of a sudden we're going to talk a little bit about recruitment a little bit, and just happened to coincidentally work that way. So I think my content team's into something. But anyway, when you think about recruitment, and maybe this is a thought for Sharon. Her question was, she works in a free medical clinic. They have 86 admin volunteers. How do you manage when you have too many volunteers and you don't want to lose them? And I wonder sometimes when you think about recruitment, the comment you made about finding partner organizations. Have you had any experience with that, Connie? And what's that been like? How would someone navigate that? Because you don't want to lose them. You want to keep them engaged, and maybe through that partnership, there's a way to engage them until you really need them or something like that. I don't know, just a thought I had.
Yeah, if you're blessed with extra volunteers, there's probably an organization that has a similar mission or some sort of support kind of type mission that's serving a similar population or something that is short of volunteers. And if you can partner up with them on a project basis, or say 10 of those admin volunteers that you've got to say, hey, we've got a special project, we're going to be helping out another organization who really needs us. They're going to still feel that emotional high that they need, because they're helping people. They're helping, now they're not only helping one organization, but they're helping two. Their mission is bigger and expanded. And you build your social capital. That other organizations can be really appreciative of that help and support. You're now doing more, your mission is expanded, but maybe still focused on what you're doing, helping people in healthcare or with health related needs. And that's really great, because there may be a time down the road when you need a few extra volunteers and you can go to that organization and be like, hey, do you have anybody you can spare today? We're extra busy, or we've got folks out sick or something. And so that, I think that's always a great idea to help spread the wealth if you've got a few extras.
Yeah, that's good. Great question, and I love how we just get questions, because they make this fun. Like, I'm having a good time. I don't know about you, Connie. Are you having a good time?
Yeah, this is great. This is a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, next question's from Bree then. And Bree, she's in the animal welfare industry. So I'm thinking that that's something like maybe an animal shelter of some sort, not sure. But, her questions are, do you have any ideas when it comes to recruitment? Sometimes like the recruitment strategies get over complex and hard to navigate. Any ideas of how to simplify recruitment and onboarding restrictions so that you can actually work with people that need to balance that safety and community support? It's a balance. How do you simplify it without putting everyone at risk of getting sick, I guess, maybe, for lack of a better term?
No, yeah, it's hard. My husband just signed up to be our volunteer coach for our son's soccer team, and he had to go through a lot of hoops to like get fingerprinted and CPR training and like all the classes he had to take so that he could volunteer to do this. And it's needed, and obviously there's reasons for it, but sometimes those hurdles people will look at it and be like, oh gosh, I didn't realize there were 12 steps I had to take to go volunteer. I wanted to just go for go help. So if you can make that process easier and walk them through it, there's that. But also, it's all about mission, right? It's all about mission. And if you can make people passionate enough about your mission, the hoops won't matter. They just want to help, right? So making sure that you keep your eye on the prize, right? And you target those people who are going to be with you for the long run, because you also, as the administrator, don't want to have to like do all that bureaucracy and paperwork to get someone through the process and to only have them come one day.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's part of like, I think the problem that nonprofits run into is that it is time consuming to manage volunteers, right? It's time consuming to get them in the door. It's time consuming to keep them engaged, to keep them always with something to do and constant. It's a lot of work. And so making sure that you are getting people in the door who are just as passionate about your mission as you are, because they'll keep showing up every day. And so I wouldn't try to go for the shotgun approach and just trying to like appeal to everybody to get in the door. Being really targeted about your recruitment for groups that are passionate about your mission, and look at other groups in your communities like Rotary clubs, Lion clubs, Kiwanis's. There's probably optimists and all sorts of different groups in your communities that are all about giving back and participating in your community. Those groups know how it works. They know the process of having to do that volunteering thing, and they will do it every year, right? Like they'll put it into their queue of things that they do, and those are sometimes low-hanging fruit for finding volunteers.
Yeah, good comments. I think also when I think about, Bree, to your question, some ways to simplify the recruitment onboarding restrictions you might have in your organization. You might think about this, go through it yourself. Oftentimes we build these processes, but we don't ever experience it. And then you might come up with ideas of how to simplify those processes. So maybe just
that's a great suggestion. And don't undersell how hard it is. When my husband signed up to soccer, the person that was, he was like, oh, it's super easy to get signed up. It was not super easy. There were so many steps. So don't just be honest and upfront with them so that they know what. And I think that's a great suggestion, Ben. Do it yourself.
Yeah.
See how long it's going to take you. Is it gonna be 30 minutes, or is it going to be over the course of 3 days that you have to do all this work? So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's super interesting. As we think about nonprofits, I'm sure there's nonprofit organizations listening in today. They're brand new, maybe. They just filed for the 503c or whatever the situation is. Any tips on helping someone that has never had experience recruiting volunteers to get started?
Yeah, I would, my suggestion is to look at volunteers like you're hiring them as a full-time position, because that's how much time it takes to manage them, right? And so I think sometimes people think, if they haven't had volunteers before, they think, oh, it's gonna be so great, I'm gonna have some free hands to come help, and not realize how time consuming it is. So having a system and a process in place can be super helpful for managing those expectations about how much time it's gonna take. And to always to not be afraid to ask for help, and to always accept an offer if someone offers to help. If you're a new organization and somebody wants to help, find something that their skill set that they're going to be good at to help, and don't be afraid to ask for help. I'm terrible about it, but like if you have a good social network and you need someone to come help, ask for help. You'll be surprised how many people say yes to coming to help, and that it might not be your traditional volunteer. It could be your board, and say, hey, my board of directors, I need you guys to all come in whatever day to help put out flyers, or to help get the office ready, or whatever it is that you're doing. Don't try to shoulder it by yourself. And that would probably be my best tip and advice, is to ask for help.
And that resonates. I think that resonates because I've been on, coffee hours with many of people in our audience where we're just talking about challenges, and they bring up ideas and offer ideas one to another, so much to the point that we at Verified First with Volgistics created a nonprofit Facebook group so people could share their ideas. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's cool about, the nonprofit church and education world, all three together, is they are peers and they work together. They're not necessarily competitors. Mm-hmm. And it works well. So this is kind of a tricky question, I think, and I want to see your reaction, then maybe I have a thought. Teresa, good question. So Teresa asked us, her volunteers are required to have COVID-19 vaccine, including the booster shots. Okay. And in the area she lives in, only about 60% of people have the status. Any ideas of how to effectively target or recruit the right kind of people?
That's hard. And coming just from Idaho, we had low vaccination rates there too. I'm not sure what it's at now, but it wasn't very high when I left. That's really hard, and it's a tricky thing to navigate because you probably have people in your community who like and support your organization who have differing opinions about being vaccinated, obviously with the vaccination rate being low in your community, and you don't want to alienate them and say that they can't help if they want to help, but you also can't have them there, right? And so are there other ways that they can still help without feeling alienated, and making sure to communicate that you still value them and their support, but we have to find alternate ways for them to support you. And I think that's hard. So maybe they can help by being social media advocates, right? Helping share posts online, or giving monetarily, or donating in some other way. Gosh, that's hard, Ben. I'm sure it's hard. It's a hard time to be in when you don't. I think it's just the alienation part. People don't want to, especially if they want to give and support your organization, and you're telling them, sorry, you can't come in the door. You have reasons for that requirement, and I 100% understand that, but it is a challenging time. I think just making sure that you communicate that you still love and support them, even if they're not vaccinated, and you still want to be engaged with them, and you want them to be engaged with you, and that it's just the time and place that we're in. So I don't know if Ben has some suggestions. That is a tricky one.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question, right? It's a tough question. And I think you nailed it, is you want to make sure you still, so for Teresa, you want to make sure you still, I think you used the word love and support them, right? You want them to be engaged. So Teresa, I don't know what your specific situation is, but one thing, if I were in your shoes with that kind of a requirement, and as you said, Connie, and here in Idaho, vaccination rates are super low. But I think I would find other ways or create new volunteer opportunities, maybe not in person, right? Are there virtual ways? And, I just think of I've got a 20-month-old baby, and, we do reading groups, and the reading groups are all virtual. They're online. We get into a video chat and we read to the kids, something as simple as that. Again, that might not work in your situation, but I would think about ways that you can engage volunteers that don't have to, even though I don't know if that, answers a question, but I would imagine there's ways to engage people that don't need to have a vaccine, that don't need to be in person with people. So maybe think about that a little bit. That's a good one. Good, tough question, and definitely something we're faced against right now in today's world. As you think about nonprofits, Connie, maybe that are trying to revamp and, step back up, and, I think some of these local museums come to mind often for me. What are some of the ways they can rebuild their volunteer community, or ways maybe even they can re-engage people that have been volunteers in the past that just kind of they ghosted them. They went away. And no one knows where.
Well, so one thing that might be an idea, and it seems like restrictions are lifting in a lot of places, even here in California. So this may not be something you need to do, but it might be something fun, is that if you say you're a museum and you've been closed and shuttered for a long time, or limited access inside visitors, it's seeing if you can do a pop-up outdoor event, just to remind people that you're there and remind people of all the awesome things you have inside. Just doing like a pop-up thing, like for an afternoon, free, or you could charge, but getting kids or the community back out and interacting with you again, and we're being reminded that you're still there, right? I think a lot of people are like, gosh, is that place even open anymore? What are their hours? I don't know when, just getting back in front of people's faces is a really great way. There's a children's museum in Twin Falls, Idaho that's, it's not built yet, but they did just pop-up events all through the Magic Valley, at schools. They partnered with schools or just went to parks, and they kept themselves relevant and in people's faces as they fundraised and built a board and are building their new facility. So I think it's a really good tool for getting people back involved and getting them used to going back out again. I think we've all gotten used to being at home and not going out as much, and getting them excited about going out again. There's another idea. Say you you're short, you might be short on funds because you haven't had guests and visitors for a year and a half or 2 years, or very low visitorship. This is a for-profit business, but you can do it for nonprofits too. That was in Coos Bay, Oregon. It was a brewery. They were building, they needed funds, and they sold like beer memberships. And so you buy, it's $100, and then on Wednesdays you'd get a free beer. Wednesdays and Fridays or something. They're slow days, right? And you get free for a year, and you get a pint glass. You could do that for a museum or an art gallery or something like that, where patrons can just buy and let them know what they're buying though. So that's what that brewery did, is that they were using those dollars to buy furniture, locally sourced furniture and art to put into the brewery. So what are you're gonna sell $100 memberships that get just a select special group, some sort of benefit that they're gonna get all year long, and it's gonna go to putting in a new exhibit or hiring a new curator or whatever it is that you do. People love that, and they love supporting you, and they want to find a way to do it. And then they get like free admission once a week or something. So.
Yeah. People do like being members of kind of elite groups. So question, Connie, are you a member of the beer club?
I have my multiple beer glasses. I'm not currently because it's in Coos Bay, but when they would announce, I was like, because they were only selling 100, so I would go over that day, get my pint. And I did. That's the nice thing, is that I didn't go every Wednesday, right? I probably only went like, I don't know, a dozen times a year. So I definitely didn't get my money's worth, but I loved being a member of the club. I loved knowing what my dollars went to. One year it was the furniture and art. One year it was helping them build an expansion onto the building to expand their dining room. So every time you went in, you're like, I helped with that, and you like knowing that you're supporting a local business, your local museum, your local art gallery, your local youth group, or whatever it is that you want to support. It was really clever. They raised like $30,000 every time, sold out, and it didn't really cost them anything other than my occasional pint glass. So
yeah, I love it. Well, we're going to wind down a little bit. We got just a few minutes left, Connie, and it seems like we probably could chat with all these questions like all day long, and it'd be fun. So we're going to talk a little bit about volunteer life cycle. This next question that I have here is also a good question, I think. And, this is from Chelsea, I think. Yeah, Chelsea. And, it's someone comes into the workspace and kind of vents all their life, right? How do you deal with difficult volunteers? And thinking that with the mindset of a life cycle, there's probably a point when they come in, they're excited, they're now comfortable, now they're vetting their whole life to you, maybe things you don't need to know or want to know, and maybe that's an early signal that you need to help them. What are some ideas to help someone like that? Good question, Chelsea.
Yeah, I think, I think when people volunteer for lots of reasons, and sometimes it's for that sense of connection, right? And that person, it may be hard going into work every day because you're like, oh, they're going to be telling me all their woes, and I came here to help people, and instead I'm going to be hearing about everything that's terrible in the world. Again, I think it's, you don't want to see maybe you need to volunteer less days of the week here, or maybe find something else to do. But it's also part of the onboarding process in any work environment, right? Whether they're a volunteer or like a coworker, they can't be bringing the whole office place down, right? And griping at people and being grumpy and bringing the whole vibe down, right? So it's part about building that culture. But you also need to support them if they're going through something particular in their life, they were a happy, functioning person before, but now they're depressed every day they come in, something's going on in their life. They may just need help and support through that time, and maybe making sure that they have the resources that they need, or maybe finding other way to challenge them, right? Maybe they've gotten comfortable in their role and they're not finding it challenging anymore, and that's why they have time to gripe to you. But maybe giving them something more challenging to work on might be. I think about kids who are disruptive in class, right? They're being disruptive because they're not being challenged enough. That might be, they may not be being challenged enough in their volunteer role, and that might be a solution. I don't know about that particular scenario.
But definitely not easy, right? I mean, no. And I think the next question is somewhat related. We'll maybe wrap up with this last question here from Whitney. Again, for everyone that's asked questions, thank you. This really makes it better than the questions we had. So what are some ideas or have you ever had an experience, maybe Connie, where you had to talk to someone that was in that volunteer seat and just didn't meet the mark or wasn't a good fit? How do you approach that?
I think just with honesty, right? Honesty is the best policy, and just say, you know, like how much you've appreciated their time and energies that they've dedicated to the organization and that they're interested in, but that it's not the right fit, you know, and I think just being honest with them. I think dragging it out and not wanting to have that hard conversation with them. I think most people deep in their bones know if it's not the right fit, right? And they might just be coming every day because it's their social connection. If they're retired or you know, this is their one outlet, they might just be coming because they need that. And I feel for that. But it's also, you're responsible for your organization's mission. And if they're sapping more from you than they're giving to you, then that's a time to have that conversation to say, thank you. But I think our journey is over, and I think we appreciated that, the time that you've given to us. And I think we just don't have enough to give to them anymore, right? Like breaking up with somebody, right? You just got to be honest and you got to rip that Band-Aid off. But you have to just, like we've said, managing volunteers is so much work that if they're not bringing enough to you, to the organization, and that's a question about whether volunteers are valuable enough for you in the first place. If you're spending more resources managing your volunteers and you're getting from your volunteers, you need to rethink your strategy on that. But certainly on an individual basis too. Yeah,
cool. Well, great conversation, Connie. Great advice, great comments, great tips. So I'm sure that everyone got a lot of value out of today. And, you know, I greatly appreciate, you know, the opportunity we had to chat. And, you know, as we think about nonprofit organizations, the reality is this is why you guys are great, is because you ask these kind of questions and you guys talk with one another, employ ideas from one another, and it just makes you better every time. So really appreciate, Connie. Your contact information is here on the screen. So if you have any specific questions you want to reach out to Connie, I believe your email address, everything's there. You've got our information here at Verified First, and of course the information from Volgistics on the screen. I saw some chat questions about the Facebook group. So here's where you get out your lucky little phone, turn on the camera and scan that QR code. It'll take you right to the Verified First and Volgistics Facebook group of our volunteer nonprofit community. So go join our group. With that, Connie, any last remarks before we turn it back to Amanda to send us off on the rest of our day, our Friday Eve?
No, I just want to thank everybody. The questions were great. They really made me think, and just thank everybody for what they're doing. If they're in this space, that means they're helping their communities and doing good works out there. And so I thank everybody for their commitment and doing good work in hard times. And thanks for having me on the show.
Sure, perfect. Thanks, Connie, so much. And Amanda, I think we're back to you. Thank you, everyone.
What a great discussion. Verified First wants to thank Volgistics for sponsoring this episode. We also want to thank everyone for your attendance today, our guest, Connie from Economic Development Coalition, and our host, Ben, for making this episode possible. We'd love to hear what you thought about our webinar today, so make sure to leave us some feedback on our post-webinar survey. We'll be sending out this webinar on demand in case you want to use this for a reference or send it to a colleague. Be sure to visit our face-to-face page on our website at verifiedfirst.com for more information on our next episode. Better yet, join our nonprofit Facebook community group at facebook.com/groups/nonprofitcommunity or by scanning the QR code to stay connected with us on upcoming events and opportunities. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.
See you, everyone. Thank you.